You can't get much more British guy than this guy. Put it together for Phil Fairclough, everybody. Come on. Yes, Phil. Welcome on this ramp up to coronation. I'm very, very excited. When did you become a British guy, Phil? It was you were born into it, weren't you?
Well, didn't have much choice in that, Mark.
Yeah. You're a television producer. You were, again, did you live in, I don't know the answer to this question. Did you live in London as a kid, or where did you live in
Yes, I grew up in Kew Gardens, West London, close to the Royal Botanical Gardens, which is probably why I have this abiding fascination for nature and plants, and why living here in South Florida, as I do now, is such a wonder, because the plants are all like Dr. Seuss plants. So, yes.
I do want to tell people, and then I want to ask you about the royals and stuff, and we can talk about anything. It's really just an excuse to talk to a British guy. And I want the audience to know that Phil is a swashbuckling nature producer, journalist, presenter, meaning he goes to exotic locales all over the world. I met him in South Africa. And that guy you see wading through the swamp with a camera on his shoulder, or whatever, to get the better shot of the gator or some kind of exotic reptile, or some sort of rare primate, or even just to tell the story of marine life and how it all contributes to a delicate ecosystem. That's this guy, Phil Fairclough, who does that, produces those shows and has this rich history with nature. You have really always been the guy who's tried to involve yourself in telling stories about the planet.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, I grew up in West London, which is not richly endowed with animal spectacle. You sort of count yourself lucky if you see one of your gray squirrels. Although I have to say, actually, whilst we're on the subject of West London, if you've been there recently, you may be surprised to hear the screeching. Imagine this: a gloomy, gray, cold, wet winter day in February. You're walking through the streets of West London, and suddenly overhead screeches. The screeching of a flock of parrots. Can you imagine? And you look up, and there are maybe 50, 100 sometimes vivid electric green parakeets flying around. And they have adopted London, and in particular the south of London, as their home. They're actually they're called ringneck parakeets. They originate in the Himalayas, so they're quite comfortable in bad weather, and as a Brit, we have plenty of that. And they apparently escaped from a film studio where some pirate movie was being made in Shepperton Film Studios. And they've made themselves quite at home. And I just wish that when I had been a kid, obsessed with nature as I was, because I was reading about the great British animal collector Gerald Durrell. And of course, it was pre-David Attenborough. We didn't even have a TV, but when we got a TV, it was Jacques Cousteau. But yeah, I was inspired by all of that. And then I charted my course to study zoology, which then took a bit of a detour when I became a journalist for the BBC.
Yeah, exactly. You brought that background to this this career and this profession, and then that morphed into actually producing these nature shows and reporting. Go ahead, Kim, for Phil. And you have to unmute, but there we go.
I just wanted to make a comment that I think only British people should be allowed to narrate nature specials. That should be it. There should be no one else. Sorry, Mark.
How dare you, first of all.
Only the British people on the nature specials. That's it. That's all I want to say.
When Sir David finally gives up his his narration slot, then I'll be happy to audition.
Yeah, it is
Bob,
true.
You have a better baritone.
It is my world, narration, but I also know when, somebody else is better for the piece, so I would happily yield. There is something about the British way of speaking that is intoxicating. You have to admit, Phil, Americans, we roll over for that accent.
Oh, well, so I was told, actually, but it didn't. No one ever quite rolled over for me in that respect. But I do get the "I love your accent," and my response is "I love yours." But yeah, the British accent, it's become a bit more mundane now because every show seems to have the bad Brit, whether it's Simon Cowell, and we're usually cast in the role of villain. So it's a double-edged sword, and you do have the tendency to sound a bit haughty.
Yes, but you have to ride that line from haughtiness to sophistication. And that's
arrogant. Or elegant and arrogant.
Yeah. Where's our Simon?
It's about as bad as it can possibly get.
Yeah, there you go. That's our Simon. It's the desperation. You have to.
I think there's a hint of desperation. I really do.
Yeah, there you go. That's our Simon.
Yes.
So now to the Royals. I mean, you've, you're a refugee from Britain, having set things up here. How long have you been in this country?
So I arrived in America full-time, shall we say, in the end of 2002 to take up a position as a head of production for the Discovery Channel. And that lasted a while. And then as usually happens, a bit like being a football manager, you get fired and go back to doing the day job, which was actually making films. And but yes, I've been here since 2002. I never expected to still be here. But luckily I met the love of my life, who you know well, who's also in the animal chasing game.
And she's a brilliant primatologist. Yeah.
She is indeed. And luckily she selected me as her prime mate.
Oh, that was very strong. Yeah, I love that. Good. All right. So, Phil, tell us about then your take on the Royals. And I believe you have a couple of Royal stories. Yes,
indeed. Well, it's quite common. I think it's hard for most people who don't have a monarch at their beck and call, on the coins, on the stamps, named on many buildings, to sort of recognize that they're kind of in the air. They're everywhere. I was, like I mentioned, the Royal Botanical Gardens at Kew, quite the most spectacular botanical gardens. But when I was, I think I was about 7 at school, the Queen came to her garden, her botanical garden. And so we went on a field trip, a day out to Kew Gardens. And the Queen was just being driven around. I don't think she was driving herself, but being driven around from memory, it was definitely an open topped, and it probably was a Rolls Royce. So the Queen is being driven around this spectacular garden in her Rolls Royce, and sort of a day out. And for me and my cohorts, we were just sort of let loose. And I remember clearly running like a little maniac alongside the Queen in her Rolls Royce. And can you imagine doing that today? I mean, even a 7-year-old could be a threat. So
right.
They were happy times, and the monarchy was seemed to be quite accessible.
Yeah, you're right. There was an innocence to that, I suppose, that you might not find now.
I think that world has gone and has changed, sadly. And the British royals, though, are sort of beloved, even if you philosophically disagree with the monarchy, which you can do both. I mean, I have issues with the monarchy, but at the same time, I have enormous admiration for the Queen, dearly departed, and Charles. I'm quite fond of Charles. And
Well, Charles is someone who has values reflected in his public remarks that would have to be very consistent with your own. I'm talking about environmental values.
He most certainly does. I mean, he was let's say an early adopter of environmental concerns, issues, and actions. I mean, he has, and I happen to know because I visited, but he has a garden which he sort of turned into at Highgrove, which he turned into a sort of model plant-based water treatment facility. And he has long espoused care for the environment, concern for the environment, which is one of the things that I think, you know, his public persona has, and the many challenges of his life has obscured, is he really has picked up early concerns about our planet. And yeah, I like him. I remember, so I've had a number of encounters, including a trip to the Buckingham Palace with my father, who became he got one of the Queen's honors. He was a diplomat, and he got what's called a CMG, which is a Commander of the Order of St. Michael and St. George, but is colloquially known as a Call Me God.
For CMG, that's marvelous.
Yes.
So what was that? How old were you when you went to Buckingham Palace with him?
Oh, I was probably, I remember wearing a suit. So I was about 25 or 26.
Oh, okay. So you could really take it in. Okay.
Yeah, no, it was spectacular. And obviously this happens twice a year, the Queen's, or now the King's honors. There's the birthday honors and the New Year honors. And you get to select, I think, well, you get to go with your family and see your loved one. In this case, my dad, have the Queen hand him a Call Me God. He was a little bit miffed, actually. Not miffed. He was very pleased, but because he'd been in the British civil service, but then he did quite an un-British thing, and he went to work for the European Commission. So instead of getting the automatic knighthood that goes with that role, which would have been a KCMG, he only got a CMG.
Oh, that's interesting. Wow.
Yeah, no, there is definite ranks and of Queen's honors.
You know, the hierarchy and the various honors and the hierarchy associated with those various honors is part of that whole royal thing. You know, I mean, it just seems so extraordinary to me. You know, my other half loved Downton Abbey and watched every episode of Downton Abbey, watched the movie, watched it again, I think there was another movie. But anyway, Your Excellency, Your Worship, Your Highness, Your Milady, all of these things are actually specific. To me, it all seems interchangeable. She said, no. They all are specifically related to a person's position within that hierarchy. It seems extraordinary. I guess I'm getting to, as a British subject, do you find yourself... do you internalize that so you just know it? Do they teach it in school? How do you know that?
I don't know that you would know when to call someone Her Ladyship versus lady, or, you know, is a viscountess. How do you address correctly a viscountess versus a duchess? I mean, that's not. And, you know, truthfully, if you were raised in that, let's say you were I was trying to describe to someone the debutante role. I don't know if you're even familiar with it, where young ladies would be given a tour as a debutante, and they would be rolled out before eligible suitors of a particular class, and you would then have to know how to address someone. But I'll give you an example. So this was the royal story that I have never told, but it's pretty fascinating. So I had been around royals, obviously, since my childhood. As a journalist for the BBC, I covered many royal visits. But, you know, you're always sort of behind a barrier. You're in the press mob. But on one occasion, my patch as a BBC news reporter was Cornwall in the southwest of England, the far southwest of England. You may have heard the Duke of Cornwall mentioned. Well, at that time, the Duke of Cornwall was Prince Charles. And I was, so this was my patch. And as part of the Duchy of Cornwall, which is the lands owned by the Duke of Cornwall, he had an island in the Isles of Scilly, which are about 30 miles off the southwest of England. Beautiful, beautiful islands. And the one that he sort of claimed as his own was called Tresco. And Tresco was a private island that was leased by a family called the Dorian Smiths. And Robert Dorian Smith, who was the sort of laird, shall we say, to mix my countries, but he was like the laird of Tresco, and he was a youngish guy, and he and I enjoyed windsurfing together. So I was sort of friendly with him, and he had done a charity windsurf from Tresco, 35 miles to the mainland, and I covered it, and we became mates. And anyway, on this occasion, it was the sort of spring bank holiday, and I had decided to go for a little vacation with my then girlfriend to Tresco for a few days. And I knew it was a bit weird when I got a phone call from Robert saying, "Phil, you're not bringing a crew with you, are you?" I said, "No, I'm just coming, just coming for a vacation, 3 days or so." Anyway, didn't think much more about it, but I arrived from one of the other islands on a boat, which my friend had, and we landed on the beach because it's a very informal sort of place. And out of the bushes comes a burly looking guy in shorts. And he said, "You Phil Fairclough?" I said, "Yes." He says, "Oh, we're expecting you." And I suddenly realized, this is not the normal way to be greeted. And I said, "What's going on here?" And it was revealed that Prince Charles and then Diana and the boys were staying on the island. This was their spring vacation.
That is great.
Wow.
And so, yeah, go ahead.
So one of the things that I had brought with me, because I was always interested in, I mentioned my interest in windsurfing, I had brought with me some very large kites, each one about 10 foot long. And I had 3 of them, extremely powerful, very entertaining to fly. And I decided that the place to fly them was, because there were no cars on this island, so the only way you could arrive was by boat or by helicopter. But when the helicopters weren't coming and going, the helipad, which was a field, was available for flying kites. So I took my kites down to the field, the helipad, launched them, and over the horizon, whilst I had these big kites on strings like this being pulled around, suddenly a golf cart appears, and I look up and I see it's my friend Robert, and there's someone with him, and he pulls over, and I don't pay too much attention. I think, I'm trying to fly these kites, and he says, "Ah, Phil, you've got your new toys. Mom, may I introduce Phil Fairclough from the BBC?" And I look up, and lo and behold, it's Diana.
Wow.
And then another golf cart comes over with 2 boys in it. It's William and Harry. And what do young boys want to do when they see like this new toy?
They want to play with the kite too.
They want to fly the kites. And these are kites that, I must weigh 165 pounds. They would pull me off my feet in no time. Just a gust of wind, and you're
sure.
You've seen people sailing kite boards, and they're very, very powerful. So I think, this is tricky.
Yeah, you don't want to say no, but if you give them these, right? You can't say no, but if you give them these things, they will absolutely. It's a tragedy waiting to happen.
They would. Here am I thinking, what's going to happen if I injure or worse the future King of England? So anyway, I compromised this by I let them play with the kites, but with my other half at the time holding onto the strings, and inevitably they crashed, and then I would have to scurry around and put them back together and launch them again. But they got their game time, and then Diana said, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I hope they're not being a nuisance." And I'm thinking, you have no idea. But what was really, really entertaining, and this was the other thing that was, I was a journalist. I was a non-working journalist, and I was the only journalist on the island. But all of the assorted Fleet Street press had hired boats. They were desperate to get onto the island, and they all knew I was there. Because, you know, journalists, and they're all texting me, "Phil, what's going on?" It was pre-text, and I'm thinking, I have a great story here to sell, but I am not going to sell it. This is just an amazing encounter. And anyway, at one point, so my girlfriend's nickname for me at that time was Frog, and she's going, "Frog, do this, Frog, do that," and suddenly I hear this little voice pipe up, "Frog, Frog." And it's William. Now imagine he's 8 or 9 or 10, whatever he was. And I said, "Come here, oi, come here. Only certain people in this world are allowed to call me Frog, and you're not one of them."
Wow.
At which point he reached into his pocket and says, "I'm terribly sorry. Would you like a Fox's Glacier mint?" And handed me a sort of a candy to placate me, which, you know, I haven't ever told this story except to some close friends. So you're the first media outlet to hear.
I love it. It's a great story. I love it for the accidental nature of the encounter, you know.
Completely random, which is why, you know, I thought there's no gain here. This is just something that'll be fun to recount at some point.
I love it. I love it. Phil, come visit again. Tell us about one of your projects when we have time to discuss one of those various, I think, magnificent, exciting, dynamic projects that you bring to life about the planet, about various fragile ecosystems, about exotic locales, all of that stuff you do. I just love it. So thank you for indulging us with some royal stuff today, and come again, will you please?
I would love to. Thank you, Mark.
Okay. Fairclough. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.